Welcome to Beyond Six Figures, the podcast that helps business coaches to micro-niche, get noticed, and become fully booked. Learn from top industry leaders who've successfully taken their businesses and their lives beyond six figures. Get ready to level up your coaching business and make this world a better place, one business at a time. And now, here's your host, Ziv Raviv.
Welcome to Beyond Six Figures. Our guest today is David Monro-Jones, Operations Director of the International Authority for Professional Coaching and Mentoring, also known as the IAPC&M, and the founder of Perceptual Reality, a coaching consultancy focused on leadership, development, team effectiveness, and cultural alignment. With decades of experience in accrediting coaches and supporting their business growth, David brings a unique blend of practical insight and professional standards to the coaching space. Today, we're going to discuss his own coaching experience. We'll discuss the importance of accreditation and a lot of other topics. There's so many things we can learn from a worker like David Monro-Jones. David, it's so good to have you here with us. Hi, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. And thank you, Ziv, for inviting me along. I enjoy talking, so really looking forward to this.
We are here to talk, and I want to start by asking you about your business experience as a coach. Give us just some of the depth, some of the methodologies that you work with so that we get to know you more.
So from a pure coaching perspective, I tend to align myself to the concept of whole person coaching, which means that I bring all of my experiences, all of who I am, all of what I've done, all of what I know, all of what I have access to into sort of a coaching and mentoring sort of engagement. So typically, I understand all of the coaching models, so grow, achieve, Oscar, and everything else. But what I believe in more than that is the relationship that you have with the client, that you can meet the client where they are and walk with them to whatever the destination is, because at some points they don't know that. For leadership, I lean heavily on the Marshall Goldsmith stakeholder-centered coaching approach, because that allows you to find out more from stakeholders. Because in any coaching relationship, or in most coaching relationships, the one thing that sometimes we forget is we only ever get one side of the story. And stakeholder-centered coaching allows you then to speak to the person's manager, their direct reports, their colleagues, and so on and so forth. So you get a bigger picture. But you still have to meet you still have to meet the client where they are. And it's the same principle, with mentoring. So I draw on that. Emotional intelligence, values, process communicate. Literally anything that I've got in my toolbox, I will use and people have access to.
I love it. What do you prefer? There's a lot of coaches I meet and experienced coaches that will work with people in an organization, leaders of sorts, managers, even salespeople. That's a flavor of coaching that is very significant. And then there's people who will work with the business owner himself or herself, and that is also requires certain skills, requires methodologies. What is your lifelong journey and experience have been more focused on, or what did you prefer among them?
I prefer working in organizations with people who are aspiring to move up the leadership ladder or the management ladder. I tend to prefer people who are looking at possibly a board move. That's where they aspire to get to. I've worked with business owners before, and we've worked on things like values and culture and looking at what the organization currently looks like and what they would like it to look like. I've worked with organizations looking at their teams and team effectiveness, which is something else I'm certified in. Generally, the people that gravitate towards me are looking for improvement in leadership in some way, shape, manner, or form. And therein, to a certain degree, so like lies the problem, because a lot of people go, I want leadership development. And it's, well, if you look on Amazon for leadership development or Google, you're just bombarded with your hundreds of thousands of topics. So narrowing it down to what is it that you actually want, and being able to help people sort of direct their career, whether that's inside the organization or whether it's a move outside of the organization, allows you then to understand where the person wants to go to. And that means that you can work with everybody. So like using the sort of the same methodologies, if necessary, if that's the appropriate one for the client. And sometimes just asking a random question is the thing that moves them from one to the other. I don't like to be confined by any particular model. I don't think that works. It's not a one size fits all, because people are different. So you could work with somebody aspiring to move to a director level, and you could work with an SME business owner and have a very similar conversation using the same sort of framework, and have totally different outcomes, because they have different experiences and they have different passions and motivations. And just getting to the core of that rather than the superficial, it is for me like the richness of the conversation that you have with somebody.
So when you work with an organization, you work with multiple people within the organization for the most part, right? So who is the client in this case?
The client is always the person who initiates the contract. So when we talk about sort of contracting, so like in an organization, you have often what's loosely called the three-way contract. So you have the direct contract with the organization, which are the ones who've essentially said, we want you to come in and do this, 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 and this. And then you have another contract with the client or the leader within the organization. And that's where you have to be crystal clear about what is and what isn't confidential, and what you can talk about and what you can't talk about. And it's also important to have some form of, if somebody says this and I need to tell somebody about that, who do I tell? Because in some organizations I've worked in, it's been, coach these people, we don't want to know anything, it's totally confidential within, between you, so like on the leader, kind of. But I always have the question, that's great, but what if they say something that needs to be reported back to the organization? Who do I take that piece of information to? So, if there's bullying or sexual harassment or something like that going on that comes out. Other organizations want more of a feedback, in which case you need to inform somebody that, look, the organization is asking for that. But I would always encourage the organization and the leader that I'm working with to have that conversation themselves, rather than me writing a report, because it then becomes like almost hearsay. And to be fair, I just can't be doing with that. I'm much along the lines of, look, if you want to know what's going on, sit down and talk to that person. That's what it's all about. Communication is the key to everything that we get involved in.
Does it ever happen to you when you coach, when you're hired by an organization, your client might be the HR person, or it might be someone in management that decided to work with you, and they sign a deal with you, and they basically pay for you to coach multiple people. Does it ever happen to you that one of the people that are being coached don't really want to be there?
It's one of the key questions, or especially when you're hired by an organization, is that question. What do the people know about the coaching process? What's the culture in the organization regarding professional development? Have you done anything like this before? Are they volunteering to do this, or are they being told that they need to be coached? Because there is an expression which is never take a bad engagement. Now, working with somebody who doesn't want to be coached can be done, but it's a little bit like the old adage of, you can lead a horse to water. Yeah, but you can't make a drink. And if they don't understand why they're there, then any conversation around that starts to become a little bit fragmented in the sense of, well, I don't know why I'm here. I'm perfect. And one example that I had, I was working into like the petrochemical industry, and there were sort of 3 people in the group. 2 of them totally understood why they were there. One of them was very reluctant to sort of engage in the process. And the breakthrough of that was, again, just meeting the person where they were, having a conversation, which went roughly along the lines of, okay, so how do you perceive yourself? I perceive myself like this. How does the organization perceive you? I don't know. And that's where we started. So, okay, so you have your approach, but if the organization are looking for something else and you want to progress within the organization, then I more or less left it like that. And we got into more of a conversation about increasing awareness, accepting feedback from other people, starting to understand what other people were looking for, and ultimately, it was successful. But
what are some of the KPIs though? When you work with a person in an organization, probably they want to be coached to some degree, or they understand that it's a part of their growth, or maybe it's a perk from their standpoint. But how do you measure that you did your job well, or the client, the coachee have received some transformation?
I work on a behavioral framework. So we would identify what key behaviors need to change sort of for the leader to improve them within their effectiveness. And we will measure that over a period of time using mini surveys and full surveys. So involving the stakeholders, the other people, means that I can say to the leader, right, okay, this is what you've agreed to do in terms of improving yourself as a leader. And that'll be a very specific action plan. And it'll identify the main behavior and then the sub-behaviors of what that might look like. For example, if somebody wants to improve their communication in presentations, saying, I want to improve my communication in presentations isn't enough. It's too broad. So we break that down. We encourage then the leader, and when I say we, that's sort of me and the leader, to encourage to then go out, speak to stakeholders. What do I need to do to improve my presentation skills in here? Gather that feedback, bring it back, identify what those behaviors are. That becomes the action plan. And then we measure that over a period of 3, 6, 9, maybe even 12 months. And then we do another survey and we ask the stakeholders, what's the change that you've seen in this leader's behavior? That's what we get. We get sustainable, actionable behavioral change. Decision-making, delegation, strategic planning, communication. The list is almost endless. But once you've identified what is the behavior that needs to change, how are you going to do that? Once you've got that starting point, you've got a perfect measure.
I see. And what's an ideal length of a coaching agreement with you, with a specific person, not with the organization itself? Like, is it time bound? What's your preference?
It's a little bit like how long is a piece of string? And it depends what I'm working with the client on. For example, in some mentoring relationships that I have with people, and I do a reasonable amount of management mentoring. This is an actual example from yesterday, because the mentee asked me that very same question. And I said, for some people, I only need one session to highlight and just identify, okay, this is what you want. Maybe these are the things you want to go in, think about. And then it's a little bit like, right, that's it, my work is done. For other people, if it was a leadership engagement and we're looking at sustainable behavioral change, the minimum amount of time is ideally 6 months as a minimum. It can be done in 3, but you have to be very specific about what's going to happen in that time span. And it can go up to 12. The concept of, I get results quickly is not something that that I'm particularly fond of reading anywhere, because things need to be sustainable. It's If I give a gardening analogy, I can go into the garden and pull a weed out. But if I haven't pulled it out by the roots, it's going to grow back. So it's a sustained process. You have to get to the root of the issue in order for something to change. And people need to be open to receiving feedback. They need to be open to change. They need to be open to critically taking responsibility, because they can work with me or some of the best coaches in the world, best mentors, counselors, psychotherapists, whatever it is. You can't do it for them. They have to have that commitment. They have to have that motivation. So sometimes we might spend a shorter amount of time just looking at motivators. What's driving you to this? Somebody I was working with yesterday, again, going back to this, meet the person where they are, was, what do you want in your life for your career? I don't know. And that's fine. You can't force somebody down a model or a path and say, well, if you did know, what would it be? And I put my hands up, when I, in my younger days, it was, that's a good question to ask. Whereas now it's like, okay, so let's talk about that. How does that look? Does it bother you? Because they said that I don't really like to have plans, but the manager was saying, oh, you need to have a career plan. I said, well, how does that feel? I said, well, it feels awkward. So, well, don't have one then. You can't force square pegs into round holes, or round pegs into square holes, and expect a perfect result.
We go through this change in organizations, especially in regards to leadership, where the managers are getting younger over the years, right? They come from a younger generation at the very least, which means that nowadays some of your clients are actually millennials or even Gen Zs, potentially. How do you change your behavior with them? And do you notice any differences when it comes to the different generations?
I don't change my behavior, because if I change my behavior, that would be unauthentic or inauthentic. But what I do say to people, in total honesty, is, look, I came through a different generation, but what remains the same is people are people. Conversation is conversation. We will talk about different ways of doing things. If COVID taught us anything, it taught us more about the remote issues of dealing with remote teams, and spending a lot of time on Zoom or Teams or whatever platform it is, rather than having that interaction, and what are the consequences of that. We talk about the rise in AI. Somebody I was talking to recently actually said, I was thinking about hiring a coach for this problem I had, but I just went on ChatGPT instead. I just keyed it into that and worked with that. And I said, how did it work? So it was fine. And that is one of the things. It's to recognize that, okay, what are you working with? What are the issues? The generic ones, decision-making, communication, they remain the same. Leadership behaviors, irrespective of the age, haven't changed. It's just the approach, the technology that's available, the mindset. But also, deeper into that, what do the younger generation, showing my age, the younger generation, what do they want out of life? Do they want to travel? Do they want family? Are they trying to get their foot on the housing? What is it? What are those underpinning values and motivations that might be slightly different to other people? And the one thing that I do see is that in some cases, not all, younger people are less inclined to see working in an organization as a long-term plan. So what I would call older leaders and executives that I work with who've come through the process, it was almost you joined an organization and you stayed there for a long period of time. That doesn't seem to be as important now. People are more likely to think, the grass is greener, or that's a better opportunity. Somebody that I recently worked with had bounced around from job to job at a rate of around about 6 months on average. And that was because of the role that they had. They would go into a role, fix everything that needed fixing, and then they'd get bored. And it was like, my work here is done. And that was fine. That, for their lifestyle and the way that they wanted to work, it was fine because a lot of the things that they did, they could do remotely.
Interesting. Sounds like they need to be a coach if they know how to fix so many problems.
Yeah. They're sort of, I would say they're heading to being sort of like a troubleshooting consultant, which is predominantly what they are.
Yeah. So are you concerned by AI? Do you think you will be replaced one day? Oh,
the answer to that really lies in the person who's going to choose, do I want to work with a coach or do I want to work with AI? There is no getting away from the rise of AI in terms of its ability to provide information. We see this even on Zoom with the text that comes out. If you go into Google now, you get an automatic AI summary of what it is that you're looking for. So I'm not particularly worried about sort of being replaced. I think that a bit like your sat nav, AI is is a supporting tool for what you're doing. It can be incredibly useful, but it does not have the personal experience of the person that you're working with to be able to. You can ask AI questions, but AI can't really ask you questions. You and get to the core of, okay, so I'm hearing what you're saying, okay, but what I'm also hearing is what you're not saying, and notice those little those little aspects. But it'll always come down to the choice of the client, which is the same for choosing a coach or a mentor or anybody that they want to work with. They'll either be guided towards, yes, I want the personal approach, or they'll be guided towards the technology approach.
What do you do, David, to get people to learn about you and to hire you?
I tend to spend most of my time on LinkedIn. I used to go to quite a lot of networking events. The amount of work that I do for the IAPC&M has sort of removed that. For the past certainly this year, because I've been involved in a number of quite large scale projects. But generally networking events and social media are what I tend to gravitate to. Specifically, LinkedIn. My LinkedIn account is potted onto Twitter. The speaking engagements. So presentations, things of that nature are what I generally prefer doing.
And when you look at your clientele, how many of them in percentage, roughly, from referrals and word of mouth, and how many of them are from your active work on LinkedIn?
I would say that the majority come from word of mouth and referrals. They often linked to LinkedIn, if I can use that expression, because they will read the recommendations, or people will mention that they've worked with me, and that tends to be my main source of referral and client work. I'm on a number of different directories as well.
What's your opinion about a coach that will charge a different amount of money from different clients?
It's a good question. I think that some coaches that I've come across will have a separate fee for individuals as opposed to organizations. And I know some people have a separate fee for life coaching versus executive coaching. I think it's down to the individual. From my personal perspective, there's always a conversation around budget. At some point, because what I don't want to do is have a conversation with somebody for them to get really excited about what we can do, and then find out that they don't have the budget to do that, because I'll probably want to really work with them as well. So there's, at some point, there is a conversation around that so that people know what the situation is. I think that as long as your pricing structure is clear and transparent for the client, so that there are no surprises, I'd be essentially saying, look, it's down to the individual. I can comment about what I do, but I can't really comment about the ethics, and the morals, of other people who do different pricing structures.
Do you think that accreditation is a must for a coach?
Now, that's an interesting question. Bearing in mind, the various hats that I have, you would expect me to immediately say, yes, it's an absolute must. The reality of the situation is that coaching and mentoring is not a protected word. which means that anybody can set themselves up as a coach. Without training, they could read a book on life coaching. And my usual stance on that is, you could be a florist on Friday and you could be a life coach by Monday. Accreditation gives you something that other coaches don't have. And it indicates that it's a check on the fact that you've been trained, you've been qualified or certified, and you've gone through another level to become accredited. What that means is that you're covered by a code of professional conduct, you're covered by a complaints procedure, you have access to whatever the organization that's accredited you, something like, provides. But most importantly, for the end user, for the client who is working with that coach, they can recognize that the coach has invested time, money, effort into understanding how they can work with clients so that they don't make horrendous mistakes. I would always say to anybody who was wanting to work with a coach or a mentor, look for somebody who's accredited in some way, shape, manner, or form, because the implications of working with somebody who's not trained, not qualified, not accredited, could be catastrophic. Because if you're not trained, so for example, within part of the the assessment process that we use is to ask people, okay, how would you refer somebody to an alternative therapy if something comes up in the coaching session that is outside of your comfort zone, outside of your skill set, certainly needs to be referred? What would you do? People who aren't accredited and working backwards, and people who haven't been trained, won't know that. They won't have considered it. An accredited coach will, because they've been asked. And if they don't know the answer to it, the feedback that they receive will give them the information for that. The organization will give them that. So I think it's essential for clients to make that decision. And I would always steer them towards being accredited. Organizations are more if you work in the organizational setting, so like leadership, executive coaching, they're more likely to ask, are you accredited? Who with you? And what did that involve? With life coaching, being totally honest, clients tend not to, because clients haven't come through coach or mentor training. What they're interested in is, and to a certain degree, this is the same for leadership and executive coaching, their key question is simply, I've got this issue, can you help? Are you the right person to work with?
Yeah, this is fascinating. And the difference between organizational coaching and executive coaching and life coaching is key. And hearing this from you is like a very fair assessment, a very honest assessment. Where can people go to, David, to learn more about your work and to connect with you on LinkedIn?
Yeah, they can find me on LinkedIn. I'm under David Monro-Jones. That's MONRO-JONES. I generally connect with anybody who contacts me. They can also find me through my own website, which is perceptualreality.co.uk. And I'm open to having conversations with people generally about anything and everything.
And we'll put the links in the show notes to both your website and your LinkedIn, and to your accreditation body, where you serve as one of the instructors and in the management of the accreditation body. So thank you for sharing this moment with us to connect, to geek out on some important differences in the coaching world. And thank you everyone for listening for another episode of Beyond Six Figures.
Thanks for listening to Beyond Six Figures. Check out the extended show notes that include bonus material, practical tips, and exclusive resources on our website, zivraviv.com. Until next time, keep dreaming big and pushing your business and your life beyond six figures.